Phil, such a pleasure to have you on the podcast for a third time. Really happy. I want to say this podcast is like an excuse just to catch up with old friends, learn about what they're doing, and then selfishly learn. And I find you're one of the world's leading experts in AI technologies. So it's a great way for me to learn. So first off, thanks for being back on.
Oh,
And
thanks a lot. It's always lots of fun.
we dive right into it, right? So you're a startup founder, a repeat founder, and you've now been on a journey of starting this company called Waverly, which we spoke about back in January of last year. And so, talk to us a little bit about the journey of Waverly, its inception, but more the different waves, pun intended,
Yep.
of the company.
Yeah, it's the first time I do a small startup thing from the ground up. Element AI was a big success very quickly, so I lived through one way in which startups can be. But in that case, it's very much the startup that pivots all the time because it needs to. And I love and hate it. I think it's if you ask any startup founder, you'll get that answer. But the way in which I described it recently is, and you just said it before the interview, but it makes so much sense. It's strong opinion loosely held. The idea with Waverly is very much we've been doing one thing at a time with a lot of I don't know, we commit to it. And people sometimes say you're crazy, but it's better to be committed into something a bit wild, a bit like bold, than to be like, oh, yeah, we'll try 10 different things. So we've committed to things, but the problem of being super committed is sometimes it doesn't pan out. It's not what you need to build. So that's what the story of Waverly is that. We started with here's a newsreader that you can control using natural language. And we didn't get the traction, but we did it like 100%. So we built a lot of really interesting things while doing it. And then we looked at what we've built and we're like, okay, didn't work. What we do? Waverly 2.0, we're a social network. And then people were like, are you crazy doing a social network? We're doing a social network. And we just bought into the vision. We built it. We built a lot of super interesting things. We go out with it. It's not that it doesn't work this time around, but it's not the right time to be building that kind of startup. Like it needs a lot of funding and we can't find it. There are a couple of other things in the equation that mean it didn't work, but we did that for more than a year and then just okay, strong opinion, but loosely held. What do we do next? And now it's Waverly 2.0. It's a B2B business built on top of all the technologies that we developed in Waverly 2 and Waverly 1. So there's a lot of really good stuff here. And it's even though it's totally new, it's turning to be a bit mature in the technology stack that we built and that we're using for this new company. And it's super exciting. So it really is a story about pivot, a story about strong opinion, loosely held. And it's difficult, but especially when you have to do these switches. But once you've done them, it feels good. It's just, okay, we're doing this with all we've got and let's do it again.
Yeah, it's a quintessential startup story, right? So like everyone thinks, oh, these great successes are preordained, but nothing's preordained, right? Like the
Totally.
journey is very squiggly and you have to take left turns, right turns, and that's not always an easy thing to do. I wanted to poke you maybe a bit on the values of the company because I know one of the core tenets when you guys started was really going against the grain of this like algorithmic dopamine filled screen addiction that we have. And that was part of really the reader apps, the social network of moving away from clicks to words, I think, as you had put it. How have you thought about that in this current evolution? We'll talk about the product and the roadmap itself, but maybe just at a macro level.
Yeah. So as a reminder, we've really stemmed from my work at Google, like being part of these algorithms that are really good at getting us addicted. But the overall feeling was we are more than our clicks, we're more than what we do. And as a result, our technological environment, which doesn't know about these other aspects of ourselves, is not really good at gathering for them. So, how do we solve that? And the idea of Waverly since Waverly 1.0 has been hey, let's listen to people, listen for real, not just to their click, to their words, to what they have to say, to how they express what they care for. And natural language was a core part of Waverly since the beginning. I like to say before ChatGPT was even a thing. So, hey, we were doing ChatGPT before it was cool. Unfortunately, it wasn't ChatGPT. But so the core tenet is empower people, let their words shine so that they can get a technological environment that's fit for them. The challenge has been, hey, people don't like to talk about that stuff. They don't think of a technological tool, a computer, a phone, something as, hey, I'm going to sit with it and express the deeper part of myself so that my experience can reflect that. And so we always were fighting an uphill battle for that. And we were ready to find, oh, the idea switch around a little bit. It's now what we're thinking about is a people want their technology to just work for them. Okay. So if they pick up an app, if they pick up a phone, any app, and it learns about them and it personalizes the experience, that's not a bad idea in itself. The experience becomes better. The problem is when you can't see how the experience is being personalized for you and when you can't change it, right? So you basically end up with, hey, Facebook learned about myself through all my clicks, TikTok learned about myself through all my clicks. And now I'm in an experience. At first, it was fun, and now it's not. Right now, it's getting me addicted. Now it's doing a bunch of things not cool. So Waverly 2.0 is about the happy wedding of these two principles. It's about saying, hey, we can personalize your experience based on your usage, but then we can make it transparent. You can see it and you can change it over time.
Interesting, yeah. And maybe I'll reflect a personal story. I spend way too much time on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I think it's been very well documented that their algorithm has been updated to spend more time on stuff that you've been watching. And I've been stuck in this doom loop now of American politics, unfortunately. And
Uh,
I can't find a way to get out of it. I'm watching Kamala Trump videos all the time, and it's okay. I can't stop this, and it's not healthy because I'm like spending way too much time. So, what do you like? So how you thinking about tackling this type of problem? Obviously, with the 3.0.
you're seeing it, you're saying it perfectly. You can't find a way out of it, right? It's like getting there wasn't too bad, but now that you're there, you can't find a way out of it. So our idea is to basically say, hey, we learn about the users. And by the way, this is all a B2B thing. Now we're offering that technology to any customer, anyone who's building an app, building a website that wants to personalize the experience for their users, but they want to do it with the values that we're putting forward, which is, hey, it's seamless. You can use it. The experience is going to be personalized. But if you want to expose the user to what's being done to help them, you can. So the way it would work for your let's say that Elon falls in love with what we're building and calls us and say, Waverly, we want your tech. We're going to put it in X. The way it would work in X for you would be you use it, you just browse stuff. The algorithm learns about Nectar loves politics, and then it gives you too much politics. And then at some point, you take stock of it and you're like, shoot, I don't want that all the time. What do I do? You would go to your Waverly web page or the sub page within X that would show you what it learned about you. Here's how I understand Nectar. And it's going to be like a little piece of text, a bit like what ChatGPT could put out, right? A little piece of text about you that describes everything it understands about you. Oh, you like politics in the morning and blah, blah, blah. And all of that was learned through your interaction with the platform. But then you can change it. You can just say, hey, you know what? I'm done with politics. You just have a little chat with it and you say, I'm done with politics. I need a break. I need a month off. And you just have that conversation with we don't have a name for them yet, but your kind of persona in X. And eventually it changes and you get something better. Unfortunately, we're not in a world where we will offer that soon to big social platforms, but the same principle applies if you're using a mobile banking app or if you're using a website to recommend movies for you. All of these platforms are trying to personalize the experience. And now with Waverly, first of all, they can do it much more simply than the big old data way of doing things, but also they can do it whilst being transparent with you about what they do. So they build a much stronger relationship with their customers.
Okay, so let's spend some time on this, man, to understand. So it's maybe I'll spit it back and tell me where I got it wrong. So let's say you mentioned like a bank or like a movie website, but let's just stick to a big, let's say financial service company. They offer different types of content to their customers when you're on the
It can
website.
be, yeah, content
Uh,
or any aspect of their experience they want to personalize for users.
they have like millions of people on it. Now each that whole experience can be personalized, and that system essentially can be completely transparent to the user. Say, hey, like bucket you in this, like these three categories, and completely transparent. And then the user can able to be opt in, opt out, modify algorithmically what they want to be seeing that website. Is that a fair explanation of the product?
Yeah, the only difference I would say is it's not going to feel like three categories. It's going to feel like a little piece of text about yourself and how you relate to the experience you're
Mm.
having on that website or that mobile banking app. So for a mobile banking app, maybe you don't want to recommend articles or posts. It's not a social platform, but you still have so much to offer. You have like different credit cards offering, you have different, like even just navigating the app itself. There are so many pages in a mobile banking apps. Maybe you can make some more prominent than others based on what the user is doing more often. Are you sending money to your relatives a lot? Maybe we should put the transfer option at the top. There are so many ways to personalize experiences today, and a personalized experience is always much better. How do you do that? And if you do it, how can you be transparent with users about how you did it for them? And so
Yeah.
Waverly is about that. Transparency is this little thing that users can look at and that captures enough about them so that the experience can be personalized.
Yeah. And is it safe to say that this is what you've just eloquently explained? Is this like the hypothesis, right? This is what you're going about to try and prove. And now the next step is validating, testing it with businesses and seeing where the rubber hits the road. How do we tweak the business model? Is that a fair statement?
So at the technology level, it's proven. As I was saying, we've been at it for a while, and that's the technology that we built and put into Waverly Social, Waverly 2.0. When you were using Waverly Social, you had this opportunity to get personalized experience in a bunch of places. You could have personalized recommendations, but you could also have a personalized moderator system that would nudge people writing in your spaces in one way or the other. So we tested the technology behind what I just told you about. It's pretty intense, but it works. Like we've made it work for Waverly, and now we're just extracting it and making it available as an API so that any customer can do something similar for their platform. But then we need to figure out where is it going to stick. Like we're getting some traction from financial service companies. Like they are the perfect match for it. They know that personalized experiences are better,
Yeah.
but they care a lot about being transparent with their users. So it's a perfect match.
Yeah, and I imagine there's probably a bunch of other industries where this notion of transparency, like if I could think of government, right? If I'm on like a Canadian government website and I'm offering, let's say, tax information, being able to personalize. Have you thought of like other, like you mentioned, like right now it's not, we're not trying to invent nuclear fusion, like the technology works, you're able to prove it. Have you thought of the application in terms of like other ways it could be applied to at the business level?
Yeah, in general, anybody who's doing analytics for their app or their website, the reason they're doing analytics is like, hey, which button are users clicking in? Is this working? Is this not working? If you're doing any form of analytics on your website, it's because you want to change it and make it better over time. The idea of Waverly is similar, but it's just going to make it better over time individually for each user. So if you have these analytics, like Waverly is a good solution for you. It's something you might want to think about. And what's super interesting about the way we do it is that AI used to be, the quote was garbage in, garbage out. You need data in order to do AI and all of that. The idea behind Waverly is data is dead. You don't need data to do AI today. You can implement what we're doing, and it's as simple as implementing analytics in your website. So we're proposing this weird new world where you can do real AI without data or just gathering data over time.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, man. I used to be really good at things like Google Analytics a long time ago. Is this something that you can almost like partner with a GA and have it as like a plugin where, you know, like the webmaster, as they were called back then, would go in, play in the website and is able to optimize the website in real time based on the customer journey, the user journey? Is that like one potential opportunity?
So as the builder of the platform, you can get the natural language representation of your users, right? So you can see, hey, here's like user per user or the big buckets of user. You could see that and use that for analytics. We think it's much more powerful for personalization, because for analytics, you're going to be changing the entire website or the entire app. Whereas for personalization, you'll just use the same tech in order to make it better for individual users. So there has been some try at expressing the output of your analytics in natural language, like instead of giving you dashboard and line graphs and stuff about your website, I'm just going to give you little pieces of text that try to capture what users are doing. That's not where we're positioning ourselves. We don't think that natural language analytics are fundamentally better than dashboards, but we think they're super useful for personalization, for making the experience different for each user according to what would work best for them.
Yeah. How much did you have to rewrite your platform, like in this like this slight pivot to B2B from everything that you had built essentially? I imagine not a lot. So like from a product management perspective, what have you had to change internally?
We have to make our API cleaner so that we can offer them to the rest of the world. So that's the bigger thing. We have to make them a bit more generic too. Like they were very specialized for Waverly Social, not that specialized, but we still need to make them a bit more generic. And we need to just repackage the entire website so that it doesn't feel the name is going to change. There are a couple of these things that need to be done. It's also just a really good opportunity to transform all the learnings that we've had into just use that opportunity to clean things up, offer something more robust. This entire like we when we started Waverly, there were no publicly available LLMs, and we the first thing we had to change on the technology stack is okay, we're building on top of existing LLMs. That's the first thing that we did. We were one of the first startup that believed in the no GPU before PMF tenet. Like a lot of my friends in AI are making fun of me for this. They're like, "Oh, you're not doing real AI. You're just a Chat GPT wrapper." And I'm like, "Dude, it's like saying you're just a C plus wrapper to someone who's building code. ChatGPT is the next software layer. Like LLMs are the next software layer. We're at the forefront of understanding what it means to be doing software engineering on top of that. So I believe it's like I'm still convinced it's the right decision. This is why we can boldly say we can do AI with no data. If your company is 100% built in like big data analysis pipeline to build custom models and things like that, it's a very challenging thought, right? You're basically telling your customer everything we've built in the data pipeline is no longer useful. So you see a lot of these companies or even full ecosystems that are saying, no, it's all about data, it's all about data, it's all about data. But I think it's holding a lot of companies back. Like they're basically saying, oh, yeah, AI is about data, big data analysis. I need to set up my entire company to gather the data, clean the data, analyze the data, all of that. And no, I think you like there is so much knowledge packaged into these LLMs today that you can start doing AI without like maybe you have data and you can leverage it, but you can start without having to do the entire business transformation that's needed in order to break the silos, access the data, that kind of things. So yeah, that's one of the biggest difference. But this tech was built through the different iterations of Waverly because we basically said, hey, you know what? We now have LLMs. Let's just embrace them and use them to build the next.
Yeah, very interesting, man. And I like the idea. I also find like the GPT wrapper thing is seems like a bit of a slander where it's like no one's oh, you're an AWS wrapper. It's just a different level of the stack. And it's a new way of computing. Maybe to challenge you a little bit on the data is dead piece. I know it's meant to be provocative, but when you're working with your customers, like I imagine their data must be like dirty, and it's the whole challenge of data labeling, which is the issue with LLMs, right? There's the whole notion of hallucinations. How do you address that piece of making sure that your customers' data is actually clean, is able to, so that the personalization engine ends up working?
Yeah, we just don't use it. We just don't use the customer data. We start from scratch. So basically, when you install Waverly, it's a bit like to go back to the concept of analytics. When you start using Google Analytics or Mixpanel or one of these tools, you don't ask yourself, "What do I have? Where are my data silos in company? How can I break them?" No, you're just saying, "I'm generating new data for that new app. Where are you trying to understand how users are using this app?" For Waverly, it's the same. You just set it up. You say, I have a new app. I'm going to generate, in our case, it's natural language snippets describing the different user interactions. But you basically start from scratch from this new app, you'll generate new data. And just with that data, the LLMs will learn quickly about your new users. You don't have to go back to your historical data. You just start fresh. If you want to leverage your historical data, you can, but you can over time. It's not something you have to get set up before you can even get started with AI. And like the reason it's possible is because even though your company probably has insights specific to you in your historical data, it still is grounded in the real world. And everything about the real world is already embedded in LLMs. These LLMs understand so many of the concepts that your company is built on that you can leverage it to get started with AI right away. So that's the slight twist. It's just like, yeah, sure, we'll use the data over time. We think that the data you'll generate with that will actually be coming faster and cleaner and better, that you might not even want to go and break all the data silos and all of this. But it's just there is so much knowledge embedded in these LLMs. Let's leverage it and let's get you started so that with a few data points, you can already offer really interesting personalized
Hmm.
experiences.
What do you think in terms of the next phase for Waverly in terms of funding, growth, teams? You could tackle it any way you want. Because imagine now, as you're moving into the B2B side, like you still have obviously work to do, but yeah, how do you envision the next like few quarters?
Yeah. I've gained so much respect for bootstrap companies now. And basically, the goal what we're really now is first of all, we're back in the garage with this. Like, we scaled it down. Like, we had an amazing team. It was small, but it was really good. But we scaled it down to two people, myself and Dave. We're building this garage style. Okay. So, the idea is move super super quickly. We have an amazing network to help us build that, but we want to build it super quickly and test it very quickly, put it out there, see what sticks, do a lot of these iterations very quickly to make the company default alive. That's something Waverly has never been. We've always
Hmm.
been in the B2C world, trying to build something that co- consumers would like, eventually pick up, and eventually it would grow so big that there clearly is a way to make money with it. The problem with this approach is it needs capital upfront. It needs a lot of capital upfront before it's proven. And I'm tired of it. I can't do another fundraise without some proof point in terms of revenue generation and the kind of things that typical VCs, in particular Canadian VCs, ask about. So Waverly now is 100% geared towards generating revenue. And before we have that, I'm not thinking about a fundraise. It's just let's make this company default alive and then let's go raise money, but in a position where we don't need it. That's where I want to be.
Yeah, it's a very very inspiring and true startup story, right? There's always these twists and turns, and I like the idea of hey, how do we bootstrap, make it default alive, and really make it happen. So yeah, best of luck, man. Best of luck. Okay, if I can help in any way, maybe to talk a little bit about your deep experience in AI, right? And it's the buzzword, but it's obviously the future of software development, and in many ways the future of society. What are your thoughts? We were speaking about before recording, right? You mentioned, oh, like I have a few different viewpoints on it. Like everyone's talking about like from the consumption of energy all the way to like building out huge data centers, right? So NVIDIA, like long NVIDIA, the notion of compute, and then on the foundational layer, a lot of like interesting points about like open source versus closed source. And then the app layers, everyone's like, oh, what's going on? Where are the apps? You could take it any way you want, but I'm curious to hear your perspective of having been so long in the space.
Yeah. The first one is this what I said before, data is dead, which is it's not true in a sense that ChatGPT and now the Elon Musk thing and Claude and all of that are built on tons of data. But when I say data is dead, it's basically saying most of AI will happen at that new software layer on top of LLMs. Okay. Most of AI will happen there. And I think we will still call that AI because it's markedly different than building traditional software, even on top of LLMs. But it's not going to be, most of it at least, not going to be gather data, train models. Okay. Um, the reason, like the data, gather data, train model is very much the building a CPU, the equivalent of building a CPU in the AI world. Like a few people are going to be doing it. There's going to be really good ones, there are going to be average ones, but that's going to be the new substrate on which you build your new kind of software. So the place where I'm a bit, I don't know, I think I'm just ahead of the curve. But what I've been telling all my friends who've built their careers building models from data, what I'm telling them is, look, the next wave is different. But it's still very much, there is still research to be done there. There is still fundamentals to be discovered. It's still going to be deep tech on top of this, the same way there has been so much deep tech on top of CPUs. But we need to move there. We need to figure out what it means to be doing deep tech, quality deep tech on top of the LLM layer. And yeah, like when I say this is what's controversial, this is what we've built, for me right now, we've talked about prompt engineering, for example. Okay, so prompt engineering, everybody's talking about it. I think right now it's just prompt hacking. When you look, even LangChain, when you look at what they've put out, it's very rudimentary. We don't understand how to build robust software on top of it. There is so much to be discovered and understood there, and there are going to be really solid stack built in that space. And that's, I believe, what we're starting to build within Waverly. What we have, the kind of thing that we were using daily, are tools to allow us to do really robust prompt engineering for this new software layer. But yeah, I guess the most controversial thing I'm seeing is telling every data whiz out there, including myself, sorry, all that knowledge you've built, understanding and building on top of data, it's not going to be exactly that's going to power the next deep tech revolution.
Interesting. Yeah. So, what do you think will be the key skill set then? Is it like, do you need to go sit down and learn deep learning techniques, or is it something else?
It's something else. It's like basically, if you think about software written on top of LLM, it's, we call them natural language functions. So basically, we're building our software internally at Waverly with these traditional functions, functional units that you call, and they take structured input and they output structured stuff, and just traditional programming. But in addition to that, at the core of our software, we now have these blocks that take part of their input in natural language and or have part of their outputs in natural language, and they're seamlessly integrated in our software. They are here or there, and they happen to run in some situations when needed. So the question is, how do you build that? How do you build a piece of software that has these intertwined natural language functions and regular functions? Um, it's not obvious. Like in our case, we developed new types of testing technology so that we could build them. We developed new programming primitives, because one of the things we do with functions all the time is when they grow too big, we break them apart in simpler little functions. As programmers, that's what we do all the time. How do you do that when your function has natural language in it? So we've developed some fundamental tools that allow us to break them apart. So we're basically relearning or rediscovering all the practices of software engineering in a world where some of the functions contain natural language or input as output.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Philip. I'd like to double click and maybe learn more because it's a world that I'm not an expert in, but it feels like there's so much movement in what you guys are building, and in obviously in terms of tools. How do you see then in terms of like opportunities for the founders? If you said, "Oh, maybe people are getting it wrong," how they should they be thinking about building the next wave of AI startups?
I'd say that, what all these pivots that we've done, we've got something wrong. We took some wild bets about the market or what to build. What we've got consistently right through that has been on the tech side. Like before everybody else, we were saying, hey, natural language is going to be the big AI revolution. Turns out we were right. And now we're saying, hey, the data stuff, forget about it. It's going to be deep tech built on top of LLMs. I'm I mean, That's a bet we're going to live by. Either we're right or Waverly's dead. I would say that's basically it. This is not something we will pivot on. Like the core of Waverly, we've been building over time and we've been consistently right. And that's why, by the way, I'm still building that company. There is something at the heart of this company that is very right. That's what we're building on the top of. But yeah, if we're wrong, I'd be like, hey, this was a startup. We had some bets. Like at the technology side, turns out that was not dead. There's data everywhere, and it's still these like big data silos that we need to break. And but honestly, I think it's going to be the opposite. All these companies that are building huge data ingestion pipeline, they're going to be subsumed because most of that's going to happen at the LLM building level, and then it's going to be how do we take the data we have? I'm not saying throw it out, but how do we take the data we have and add it to what exists in LLM so that we can build software that brings our core value as a company. You always have something different to offer. How do you bring that on top of LLMs instead of the old way of thinking, which is, oh, we have all this data, this raw data, we have to mine it for the gold it contains.
Yeah. Thanks for the explanation, Philip. Like, I find it fascinating. Like, very good contrarian viewpoint. Maybe a few final questions in terms of like your journey as a startup founder. You mentioned like having gone through the VC route, now going more through the bootstrap route, and like your previous experience with Element AI is just like from the starting gun, having a lot of money to be able to grow and build quickly. How's your experience been as more bootstrap this time around? And maybe in any lessons for like how do we build a more stronger Canadian tech community? I mean, you have talked about this a few times and you've challenged my thinking in a few interesting ways. So curious to hear you as someone that's in the founder seat, what we can do better given your current experience.
Yeah, it's a good question. If I could go back 4 years and tell Phil, who started Waverly, what he should do, and by the way, that Phil wouldn't listen. But if I could tell him something, what I would say is you don't have to raise money. You don't have to. There's this entire dynamics of VCs, right? They want to encourage some types of startups, and that's their dynamics, and they're not wrong. That's the hypothesis behind an early stage fund. But as a founder, you don't have to abide by the values of the VCs. Like they're trying to build some types of companies, but you can very well, like the position I was in, I would have been able to bootstrap. I would have been able to build a little something from scratch. I guess I wanted to build a B2C thing, which wasn't doable. I would probably tell myself, hey, you know what you're trying to do, nobody's going to fund it and you need someone to fund it. I'm not sure I would have listened. But if I were doing a B2B startup, I would say, don't listen to VCs when you start because they're going to push you down some path that are not that great. So, what I would say, if you care about the ecosystem here, I think this is one thing like, we have to step a bit away from an ecosystem that's too driven by VCs. Like, we tend to, like, the groups that tend to activate an ecosystem tend to be VCs, and they do it with a given set of values or incentives. And I believe if you really care about the ecosystem, you need more diversity in the set of people who drive it. You need some people who don't care as much about huge returns with very little probabilities because a rich ecosystem has a bunch of these companies. There are a lot of companies that are not offering VC returns, but they still build up the ecosystem. So if your ecosystem is too much driven by the VC culture of huge return with low probability, you're missing on some of the stuff. So if we want to make the ecosystem better, I would say let's try to have more diversity and the set of people who are participating in activating it.
Yeah, good feedback, Philip. And I agree with your point. And I think just VC as an asset class itself, it's not for everyone. I think it gets a very disproportionate amount of media attention and coverage, but most companies should be bootstrapped and customer funded, should not be VC play. And I think VC plays should be there for like for the specific number of companies that have this outsized potential. But for the actual person running the company, the founder or founders, they shouldn't sell their company to strangers.
Yeah.
That's what,
And just to add to that, if you just look at the ecosystem, you will see there are a lot of bootstrap companies. But what I would love to see more of are bootstrap companies built by the kind of like tech talent that could have built a startup. This is what we don't have a lot of. The bootstrap companies tend to be built not necessarily by PhD or ex Shopify, ex Google. They tend to be built by people who just, I'm going to build a company to sell shirts. And it's great. We need that. But I would love to see a few people like myself saying, hey, I could raise money. VCs would come after me just because of my credentials and everything. And I still choose to build a bootstrap company.
Yeah, very cool. And then one thing you had remember you had pushed my thinking on was like B2C and how no Canadian VCs are willing to fund B2C startups. I'm like, that's not too far, like in terms of truth. So yeah, I think you have very good points on funding, having been on that side, having raised and now going down the bootstrap route. Maybe final question would be is, or if you had a magic wand, what would you do for here for the Canadian tech community? Like anything we can do better? If you had again the proverbial magic wand.
Uh, it's hard. I would say I would warp us 10 years in the future and bring all that knowledge back today. I think it's been maturing not badly. It's just hard to learn and develop these things. I don't know. Like the changes I would do are around that. Like it's mindset changes, changing the composition of the people who are driving the ecosystem. I feel a shift now. And I would say this is what I would try to warn us against. I see a shift in the startup ecosystem towards institutionalized startupishness, right? Like we're making everything professional. We'll have a Nutman is dead, long live that new thing that I forget about, right? Like we have these shifts past CDPQ, all of that. It's becoming very structured, very professional. I don't think it's the right spirit for startups. If I had a magic wand, I would bring back like more grassroots hackathons, like funding for grassroots stuff, the way Startup Fest started. We need to keep investing in this. We have to be very careful about the mindset that, oh, yeah, if it's organized, it's better. Startups are not about that. You're not going to attract the same kind of people with super nice glass building like the Mars building in Toronto or something like that than you will with Nutman House and the kind of events that Nutman House organizes. So I would warn us against killing that spirit by trying to make things too organized. Like we will find the next great startup founders in a hackathon more than in a very structured program that I'm pretty convinced of it. This is what like the reason people build this is because they feel they feel that the ecosystem resonates with who they are and their values, and when it becomes too professional, I wouldn't like just my own example. I would have quit Google if it were to go into something that felt like a government version of Google.
I have to say, I completely agree with you on this last point, man. I find like true change happens bottom up. Like I think there's a role for the government to play.
Yeah,
I've said this a few
I'm not
times,
denying.
but yeah, I think we need more bottoms up initiatives, right? And I think
Exactly.
what's cool about Quebec and Montreal more generally is that there are a lot of these, but we need much more now, obviously with Nam and gone, and we're seeing a lot of it too in Toronto and out of Vancouver as well. Like these more bottom up initiatives, and we need more. So for that, 100% agree. Philip, man, it's been great. I could bug you for another hour. Maybe just if people want to get in touch, learn more about Waverly, reach out to you. What's the best way?
Yeah, I'm not going to reveal anything today. So you get everything fresh now. We're going to be doing some big announcements soon about it. But if you want to reach out personally, phil@mywaverly.com. Just write an email there and I'll probably be coding. So I might not answer quickly, but I will get to it.
Awesome, Philip. Merci beaucoup.
You're very welcome. C'était un plaisir.